The front desk agent typed my name twice, squinted at her screen, and then looked up with the kind of careful expression people wear when they're delivering news they didn't create. There's no reservation under Hartley. We have 2 rooms, one for Thomas and Gloria Hartley, and one for Melissa and Brandon Vance. That's all we have. I stood there with my bag at my feet and pulled out my phone. My mother answered on the 3rd ring, and behind her voice I could already hear my sister laughing about something, my brother-in-law's low voice joining in. "Mom, there's no room for me." There was a pause, not the pause of shock, not the sharp intake of breath that comes with a mistake being discovered. It was the pause of someone choosing a performance. "Oh, sweetheart, I figured you'd handle it. You're so good at handling things." She said it with warmth, genuine warmth, like she was offering a compliment. And in the background, I heard Melissa ask Brandon whether the hot tub was adults only. My mother had organized a family mountain retreat in Asheville, North Carolina, 5 nights at a luxury inn during peak fall foliage season. She had booked 2 rooms, one for herself and my father, one for my sister and her husband. She had not booked a room for me. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. She hadn't forgotten. Forgetting is a different creature entirely. Forgetting trips over itself, apologizes before you even finish the sentence, scrambles for solutions. What I was looking at was something else. Something older. Something that had been operating beneath the surface of my family for years, quiet as a current. 48 hours from that moment, every person in that lobby would wish the story had gone differently. My name is Evelyn Hartley. I'm 33 years old. I'm a senior audit manager at a regional accounting firm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have spent the better part of a decade building a life that nobody in my family has ever asked me about in any real detail. If you come from a family that confused your competence with not needing to be seen, this story belongs to you. Leave a comment. Subscribe. Stay with me. I wake up at 5:30 most mornings. Coffee before I speak to anyone. I drive to work on roads that are still mostly quiet, park in the same spot, sit at a desk with 2 monitors and a view of a brick wall, and I solve problems all day for people who pay significant amounts of money for that service. I finished my accounting degree at NC State on a merit scholarship, passed the CPA exam on my first attempt while working 30 hours a week at a hotel front desk, and graduated without anyone in my family in the audience. My college roommate Petra was there. She held up a handmade sign with my name on it. That's what I had, and it was enough, but I never stopped knowing what wasn't there. My sister Melissa had a different experience. Our grandfather Harold covered her undergraduate tuition in full, no questions, no requirements. She transferred schools twice, changed her major 3 times, and graduated in 5 years with a communications degree she has never used. She married Brandon Vance at 27, had a daughter named Sophie at 30, and stopped working before Sophie was 6 months old. No one in our family has ever once compared our trajectories out loud. They didn't have to. The family had already written the story in a language that didn't require words. Melissa was the one who needed tending. I was the one who tended herself. And somehow, over many years, that distinction had quietly become the family's entire architecture. What I want you to understand is that despite all of it, despite the scholarships no one celebrated, the promotions no one asked about, the apartment no one visited, I showed up. Every single time. A 4-hour drive from Raleigh for every birthday, every holiday, every occasion they deemed worth gathering for. I never missed. Not once. I believed for a very long time that showing up was the same as belonging. My mother called in July, on a morning when the Raleigh heat was already brutal by 9 a.m. She told me about the Asheville trip with the easy confidence of someone who had already decided the details weren't worth discussing. Beautiful inn, right in the heart of downtown, fireplaces in every room, a view of the Blue Ridge. First week of October, foliage at its absolute peak. She said, "We're all going," the way people say things they've already decided about, casually, as if the logistics are someone else's responsibility to figure out. I asked about the room situation. Your father handled reservations, she said. That night, I texted my father directly. Am I in a room with someone, or do I have my own? He responded 40 minutes later with a thumbs up emoji and the words, all sorted, don't stress. I believed him. People will ask me later why I didn't call the inn myself, why I didn't verify. And the only honest answer is, when your parent tells you something is handled, you trust that. Or you used to. Or you thought you did. I put in for 5 days of vacation, the first real time off I'd taken since a long weekend in Savannah the previous spring. I packed hiking gear, a book I'd been saving for something that felt like a real break, and a bottle of Tempranillo I planned to open with my mother while we watched the sun go down over the mountains. I let myself picture it. Melissa and I walking a trail with Sophie between us. My father in a rocking chair with a newspaper. My mother ordering dessert she didn't need at a restaurant and laughing about it. The kind of ordinary, uncomplicated family warmth I had been chasing, in one form or another, for most of my adult life. The drive from Raleigh to Asheville is just under 3 hours on I-40, and in early October, through the Blue Ridge Mountains, it is genuinely one of the most beautiful stretches of road in the country. The trees were doing everything they promised. Red, amber, orange, the occasional gold so bright it looked backlit. I had the sunroof open. I was in a good mood. I was heading toward something. I pulled into the inn's parking lot at 2:30 in the afternoon. Stone exterior, window boxes trailing late-season flowers, an iron lantern above the entrance. The kind of place that costs what it costs and makes you feel, walking in, that it was worth every penny. The front desk agent was professional and warm right up until the moment she looked at her screen and her expression changed. And that's where we came in. I was still standing at the counter with my bag handle in my fist when I heard the entrance doors swing open and Sophie's laugh fill the lobby like a bell. Melissa came in first, new coat, new boots, the easy physical confidence of someone who has never had to think about whether she belongs in a room. Brandon followed with the luggage. Sophie ran toward the fireplace. Melissa looked at me, clocked the expression on my face, and stopped. Not the way you stop when something surprises you. The way you stop when you're calculating. What's wrong? She said, loud enough that the family checking in at the far end of the counter glanced over. I told her. No room for me. They're sold out. She shifted Sophie to her hip and looked at Brandon before looking back at me, and what she said next came out with a flat certainty of something she decided before she opened her mouth. We booked rooms for our family. For us. She gestured between herself, Brandon, and Sophie. That's who we planned for. Brandon said nothing. He just smiled, slightly, at a point somewhere past my shoulder. My mother adjusted her handbag and studied the floor. My father stood 6 feet away, reading something on his phone, present in the way a piece of furniture is present. The lobby had gone quiet in that particular way, not silent but aware. An older couple near the fireplace. A family with teenagers waiting for their key cards. The front desk agent whose hands had stilled over her keyboard. All of them watching, because human beings recognize the moment when something real is happening, even when they don't know the details. I stood there with 3 hours of beautiful mountain highway in my legs and my sister's words hanging in the cedar-scented air between us, and I understood something that I had been circling for years without ever quite landing on it. I was in a room full of people who shared my blood, and not one of them had saved me a place. I picked up my bag. I'm going to go. I said it the way I'd present a quarterly finding, clear, level, no extra weight on it. I turned and walked out through those lobby doors past the fireplace, past the watching faces, down the porch steps, and across the parking lot to my car, where the Tempranillo was still riding shotgun, unopened. The door behind me opened. Mom. Her voice crossed the gravel lot between us. Evelyn, stop. You're being ridiculous. We can figure something out. I didn't turn around. I put my bag in the trunk, got in, started the engine, and drove out of the lot with my mother's silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror, arms at her sides, mouth moving, standing on a porch that had room for everyone except one daughter. The wine stayed on the passenger seat. I hadn't touched it. I just drove. Route 70 out of Asheville is busy in October, and I drove it without looking at my phone, which buzzed continuously against the center console like something alive and trying to get out. Mom. Melissa. Dad. Mom again. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands where they were supposed to be. 20 miles east, the tourist density thinned, and the landscape got quieter, and I found a small inn off the highway called the Blue Spruce, 2 stories, white clapboard, a row of rocking chairs out front that nobody was using because the smart tourists were all in Asheville. I pulled in. A man in his 60s behind the counter looked up from a crossword puzzle. Just the one night? However long I need, I said. He gave me room 9. Ground floor, back of the building, window looking out over a small pond ringed with birch trees dropping their yellow leaves one at a time into still water. $84 a night. I put my bag on the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress and opened my phone. 29 missed calls. I didn't count them right away, and then I did, because I can't help counting things. 29 calls. Not one of them was asking if I was all right. I know because I read every voicemail. I read every text. My mother's messages formed a sequence I could have graphed. Escalation, accusation, resignation, and finally a clipped fine whatever, which was her version of hanging up on me emotionally while maintaining technical contact. My father sent one text. Mom thinks you should come back. Not, we should have booked your room. Not, your sister was out of line. Not, we made a mistake and we want to fix it. Just, Mom thinks. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I opened the Tempranillo with the corkscrew on my keychain and poured some into a paper cup from the bathroom because that was what the situation offered. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame and listened to the birch trees move in the wind outside the window and drank wine alone in a room that cost less than my sister's boots. The pond outside didn't know about any of it. That was, genuinely, the most comforting thing I encountered that entire day. But the texts weren't the worst of it. That came the next morning. And if you've ever been the person your family calls back but never calls to apologize to, you already know exactly how the ceiling looked at 3 a.m. Stay with me. What happened next made leaving look like the simple part. Let me tell you about Christmas 2 years before Asheville, because context is everything. I drove 4 hours from Raleigh in freezing rain. 40 through the Pisgah Gorge at 1 lane, salt trucks, windshield wipers losing, hands at 10 and 2 the entire way. I made it. I brought 4 presents I had spent actual time thinking about. A cashmere wrap for my mother in the blue-gray she always admired in magazine spreads, a high-end fly reel for my father whose old one had seized up, a toy fire station with lights and sound for Sophie who had become briefly obsessed with firefighters, and a hand-bound sketchbook for Melissa who had mentioned, once, wanting to start drawing again. We opened gifts in the living room. Melissa went first, as Melissa always does. My parents gave her a tennis bracelet. The velvet box, the moment, my mother holding Melissa's wrist up to the window light so the stones caught it properly, Brandon filming on his phone. The whole performance, choreographed and warm and real. Then Melissa handed me a candle. It was still in the pharmacy bag. Vanilla scent. I turned it over and found the clearance sticker on the bottom. $3.99. My mother's explanation, delivered with genuine puzzlement. I didn't know what you'd want these days. I thanked her. I smiled. I drove home the next day with the candle on the passenger seat, and when I got back to my apartment, I put it on the bookshelf behind some novels where I wouldn't have to see it every morning but would always know it was there. And then there was Melissa's wedding, 18 months before Asheville. Nashville. Big venue, 200 guests, a string quartet. I was not in the bridal party. Melissa delivered this information in March with the particular gentleness people use when they've already decided something and need you to accept it gracefully. She said she didn't want to burden me with the costs. The bridesmaid dress was $260. I could have covered it from an afternoon's billing. I sat in the guest section between Melissa's former neighbor and a man I later learned was Brandon's accountant, and I watched my sister marry someone who smirked at the edge of every conversation I'd ever had with him. I found out about the rehearsal dinner from a group text that had clearly been started days earlier, dropped into my phone mid-thread as though I'd been part of it all along and simply hadn't been paying attention. But I was the one who showed up at the venue at 7 a.m. I moved folding tables across a gravel lot. I arranged 180 centerpieces, mason jars, wildflowers, a specific ribbon not Melissa had demonstrated once over video call and expected to appear consistently across every table without further instruction. I stayed until midnight. Stacked chairs, swept the floor, loaded gifts, and on my way out, Brandon's brother, leaning against a truck and not quite sober, looked at me and said with a grin, "So you're the hired help, huh?" He was joking. I know he was joking. It didn't feel like a joke. I drove home the next morning. No thank you text. Not then. Not ever. Morning at the Blue Spruce. Light on the pond outside, birches standing gold in the early air, the kind of quiet that October in the mountains earns honestly. I made coffee from the room's small machine and sat against the headboard and opened my photo gallery. 50-something family photos across 5 years. I went through all of them. I appeared in 6. In 4 of those, I was partial, cropped to a shoulder, an edge of a smile, caught at the frame's margin like an accidental background detail. The pictures that had been composed deliberately, the ones with purpose and centering and everyone arranged and smiling for the camera, I was not in them. I opened the family group text and scrolled back 6 months. I searched for my own name. It appeared 14 times. Of those 14, 12 were task assignments. Evelyn, can you pick up the extra chairs? Evelyn, Sophie needs her allergy medicine from the pharmacy on your way. Can you grab it? Evelyn, we're running low on ice. The remaining 2 were my own messages. I had sent them both. 0 messages asking how I was. 0 check-ins. 0, we were thinking about you. Not random or careless. Systematic. I was included in the structure of this family exactly as much as my labor required, and excluded from it exactly as much as its emotional warmth required. It was a system so old that everyone inside it, including me, had stopped being able to see it as a system at all. I was the emergency contact for a family that would never think to call me in an emergency. I called Petra at noon. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does, and I could hear the background sounds of the hospital where she worked in Charlotte. She'd become a nurse practitioner, and this was her day shift. Talk, she said, because Petra skips pleasantries when she knows something is wrong. I told her everything. The 2 rooms, the lobby, my sister's voice, my mother in the parking lot, the 29 missed calls, the texts that added up to silence where an apology should have been. Petra listened the way she always listens, completely, quietly, without interrupting. Then she said, "Evelyn, how long are you going to keep driving 4 hours to prove to people that you deserve a seat at a table they didn't set for you?" She wasn't being cruel. She was being precise. And precision, unlike cruelty, doesn't leave you anywhere to argue. I sat on the edge of the blue spruce bed with the phone against my ear and the birch leaves falling outside the window, and I didn't say anything for a long time. "I don't know," I finally said. "That's the problem," she said. "You do know. You just haven't let yourself say it yet." After we hung up, I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed 2 headings. What I need. What I accept. The need column, to be included in plans, not as an afterthought. To be spoken to with basic respect, in private and in public. To have a room booked. To appear in the center of a photograph occasionally, not the edge. To have someone ask, without needing something from me first, how I'm doing. The accept column was longer, and I typed it without thinking very hard because it filled itself in automatically, the way debt does. The clearance sticker candle. The back row wedding seat. The midnight cleanup. The group text I was added to mid-thread. The unanswered promotions. The unmarked scholarship. The missing reservation. The lobby. The lobby. The lobby. Sunday morning, the family group text came alive with photographs. Melissa posted a poolside selfie, sunglasses, Sophie on a float, the mountains stacked blue behind the water. Family time in the mountains, she captioned it. My mother hearted it within seconds. My father gave it a thumbs up. Brandon posted a trail shot. Sophie on his shoulders, trees going gold around them, making memories beneath it. My name appeared nowhere in any caption, any comment, any exchange. Not my absence noted, not a single line wondering where I was. I had been edited out so cleanly that the album looked complete. A finished story. No missing page. My phone buzzed separately. My cousin Dara, my grandfather Harold's nephew's daughter, a year younger than me, grew up in Hendersonville just outside Asheville. She texted, "Are you on this trip? You're not in any of the pictures." I stared at the message, wrote and deleted I left, wrote long story, sent that instead. She replied immediately, "Are you okay?" I sat with the question. The honest answer was no, and the manageable answer was something briefer. Getting there, I typed. She sent back a single heart emoji. No questions I wasn't ready for. Just presence, small, specific, from a corner of my family I'd never thought to lean on before. Monday morning. I was standing at the window watching a great blue heron work the far edge of the pond, motionless, then sudden, then motionless again, when my phone buzzed. My father's name on the screen. I opened it expecting logistics. Instead, Mom says you can share Melissa's room if you come back tonight. There's no reason we should have booked extra space for someone who doesn't bring anyone anyway. I read it once. Read it again. Set the phone on the windowsill and looked at the heron. My father had been given the clearest opening imaginable, a chance to say something true and decent. He had written that instead. Not we should have planned better. Not your sister was wrong. Not we miss you. He had reduced 33 years of my existence, the scholarship, the CPA exam, the late nights, the 4-hour drives, the 200 wedding centerpieces, the Christmas in the ice storm, down to a head count. I had no husband. I had no child. Therefore, I did not justify a hotel room. Someone who doesn't bring anyone. I took a screenshot. I set the phone face down and watched the heron until it caught its fish and lifted off over the water, carrying it south until the wingspan disappeared into the tree line. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't delete it either. I kept it the way I kept the candle, not as something to look at, but as proof, evidence that I had not imagined the shape of my own life, that the numbers, when you ran them honestly, told the truth even when the people didn't. I walked the pond trail behind the inn that afternoon. The October air had sharpened overnight, carrying leaf damp and wood smoke from somewhere west. I put my hands in my jacket pockets and walked slowly and thought, for the first time in days, with genuine clarity. I didn't want an apology anymore. That realization arrived without drama, the way important ones tend to. I'd spent years performing the emotional labor of absorbing my family's neglect gracefully enough that they never had to apologize for it. An apology from my mother would arrive dressed in conditions. From Melissa, it would be a revised version of events in which she was the reasonable one. From my father, it would come addressed to the wrong thing. And any apology from any of them would do what apologies had always done in our family: reset the clock, return me to the starting line, give me permission to drive 4 hours again and set up the chairs and answer the texts and stand at the edge of the frame. I was done. Not angry. Anger requires fuel I'd already spent. Not vengeful. Revenge requires caring about what comes next in a way I no longer could. Done the way you close a ledger that will never balance, not because you made an error, but because the original inputs were wrong and no amount of recalculating changes that. I would stop driving the 4 hours. Stop volunteering for setup and cleanup and early mornings and late nights. Stop answering calls from people who never once called to ask how Tuesday was going. I would build what I already had: the work, the apartment, the Raleigh life, Petra, the 5:30 coffee, the early mornings that were mine, and I would stop hauling timber to a house that had never built a room for me. My phone rang. Not family. Grandfather Harold. I should tell you about Harold Hartley, because he is the axis around which the second half of the story turns. Harold was 81 years old. He lived alone in a farmhouse on Lake James, about 45 minutes from where I was standing, in the foothills east of the Blue Ridge. He had lived there since my grandmother Ruth died in 2018, in the same house they'd shared for 33 years, because Harold was not a man who left places just because they got quiet. "Where are you, Evie?" His voice was the same as always, measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent decades running a construction supply business and had learned that volume was a tool for people who lacked timing. I told him the facts in order: the reservations, the lobby, Melissa's words, my father's text. I didn't editorialize. Harold doesn't need interpretation. He needs information. After I finished, there was a long pause, and behind it I could hear the old oak clock in his living room, the one Ruth found at an estate sale and he had never once considered moving. "Your grandmother would have done the exact same thing," he said. He didn't add anything to it. He didn't need to. Harold had built his company starting in 1973 with a second-hand delivery truck and a loan from Ruth's father. He grew it to 9 locations across western North Carolina. Sold it in 2009 and kept the farmhouse and the truck and his fishing rods and didn't look back. He still drove himself everywhere. Still cooked his own meals. Still woke before 5, because that, he once told me, was when the day started, and he saw no reason the day should wait for him. He called me back the next evening. "Come to dinner Saturday. Just us." I drove from the inn to Lake James on Saturday morning, winding roads through small communities, the mountains softening as the elevation dropped toward the water. Harold's farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel lane lined with walnut trees he and Ruth had planted the first autumn they owned the property. Inside, wood floors, a mounted base above the fireplace, photographs on every flat surface going back to the 1940s, faces I only half recognized wearing expressions from before I was born. He'd caught trout that morning. 2 browns, already cleaned, resting in a cast-iron pan. We sat at the kitchen table where he used to do payroll by hand, the same table, same chairs, the laminate worn to bare wood in the spot where his forearm had rested for 4 decades, and he cooked the fish in butter and lemon, and we ate without saying much because Harold has never thought silence was a problem that needed solving. After dinner, he leaned back and asked questions with the directness of someone receiving a site report. "What does Melissa and Brandon's mortgage run?" I told him what I knew. "Can Brandon's salary cover it independently?" I shook my head. "What actual function does your father perform at the consulting firm?" I told him. A title without defined duties, attached to a company Harold had once known, sustained by a paycheck that amounted to charity arranged quietly between men. Harold looked at me across the table. "I've been sending your parents' and your sister's household $9,000 a month for 11 years. I set my fork down. "No one knows except them. And you, now." The arithmetic landed before I could stop it. 11 years. 9,000 a month. Over $1 million. Not one of them had built anything with it. "How much have I sent you?" he asked. I looked at him. "Nothing, Grandpa." "I never asked." He nodded. "I know." Harold didn't tell me what he was going to do. He dried his hands on a dish towel, carried the plates to the sink, and said, over his shoulder, that he was hosting Thanksgiving this year. Full family gathering, his sister Agnes, cousins, old friends from the company, everyone. He hadn't hosted Thanksgiving in 7 years. He said it the way he said most things, as if the decision had been sitting in a drawer and he'd simply opened it. No discussion. No preview of what he intended to do with 22 people around Dorothy's china. Just the weather arriving. I drove home to Raleigh the next day and returned to work and the reliable structure of deadlines and deliverables and people who called me by my professional title and meant it. I didn't call my parents. They didn't call me. The silence between us had changed its quality. Before Asheville, it had been the ambient silence of a family that didn't check in, white noise, the kind you stop registering. After Asheville, it was a silence I had chosen. A line I'd drawn without announcement or negotiation. Just the simple, clean act of not dialing and not driving and not asking whether I was needed. At first it felt like something was missing. Then it felt like space. Then it just felt like Wednesday. And then Thursday. Each day a little further from the lobby. Each week a little more like something had been returned to me rather than taken. 6 weeks to Thanksgiving. 5 weeks before the holiday, my mother restarted the family group chat as though Asheville had been a minor scheduling hiccup long since resolved. Thanksgiving at Grandpa Harold's. Who's bringing what? A turkey emoji. A string of festive icons. Melissa responded within minutes. I'll bring wine. My mother distributed tasks with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had never let a rupture stay unaddressed long enough to require addressing. Dad's doing his cornbread stuffing. I'll handle the green beans. Evelyn, can you do the butternut squash casserole? You make it better than anyone. I stared at the screen. Excluded from a family vacation. Told by my sister, in front of strangers, that I wasn't real family. Informed by my father that my worth was conditional on having a partner to fill the empty half of a hotel room. And now, 6 weeks later, asked to spend 3 hours cooking for the occasion as though none of it had accumulated into anything worth acknowledging. This wasn't audacity. Audacity implies awareness of what's being done. This was pure habit. They had moved around Asheville the way water moves around a stone, effortlessly, completely, leaving no evidence of the obstacle behind them. They assumed I would do the same, because I always had. I replied, I'll be there. No exclamation point. No warmth, no emoji, no signal that things were settled. Just the fact of my attendance, bare and unadorned. My mother read it as compliance. Melissa likely read it as me having gotten over it. They saw the Evelyn who always shows up, always brings the dish, always makes the 4-hour drive. They didn't see the screenshot still saved in my camera roll, or the note in my phone with its 2 columns, or the ledger I had finally decided to stop balancing. My mother called on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks before the gathering. Her voice was quieter than usual, not gentle, exactly, but lowered. The register people use when they know they should say something hard and are hoping to find a version of it that doesn't cost them anything. I know you're still holding on to what happened. I was reviewing a client file when she called, laptop open on my kitchen table. I'm not holding on to anything, Mom. I'm clear about it. She didn't like that framing. I heard her shifting on the couch. Melissa gets overwhelmed, she said. She has a lot going on. Brandon's commissions have been inconsistent, Sophie's been difficult lately, and your father's arrangement isn't exactly stable. We just try to keep things smooth. Then she said, I think about what happens if your grandfather's help stops. I don't know how we'd manage. The house payments, Catherine's car, the insurance. She trailed off. I heard something real in her voice, genuine fear, the fear of a woman who had built her life on a foundation she didn't own and was beginning to understand how thin the floor was. I held that for a moment. Then she finished. That's why it's better when everyone just goes along with things. And there it was. The fear was real. The conclusion was the same as always. Keep things smooth. Absorb the friction. Give away my chair so the table stays level. You've been keeping the peace by using me as the floor, Mom. That's not fair, she said. Neither was the trip. She ended the call. I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and the client file still open on my laptop, and I thought about a stone in a river and what the river does to it over enough years. Melissa posted the Asheville album to social media the week before Thanksgiving. A full carousel, the inn, the trail, the pool, the mountain restaurants, Sophie eating waffles at breakfast, the sunset from the inn's back porch with the Blue Ridge going purple and gold behind it. Grateful for the ones who show up for each other, she captioned it. 212 likes. 44 comments. Love this. Sophie is too big. Best family. Goals. Not one person in the comments asked where I was. Because the photographs told a complete story, and I wasn't in it, and nobody noticed the negative space. Cousin Dara noticed. She messaged me that evening, "You weren't in a single one of those. What actually happened?" I hadn't told anyone except Petra and Harold. I'd kept it contained not to protect my family, but because explaining it required sitting with how much it had hurt, and I wasn't ready to hold other people's reactions on top of my own. But Dara had asked directly, and Dara was family in the way that word is actually supposed to function. I typed it all out. The rooms. The lobby. Melissa's exact words. My father's text. Just the facts in sequence. Dara's responses came in 3 separate messages, each arriving like a door thrown further open than the last. Then she told Harold's sister Agnes. Agnes Hartley was 76 years old, sharp as a newly honed blade, and had never in her life let something she believed was wrong simply pass through the atmosphere unchallenged. She called me the next afternoon. I heard about Asheville. Every word of it true? Yes, ma'am. Long pause. Ruth would have been devastated. The truth was moving through the extended family now. Not as gossip, not as drama, just facts traveling through a network of people who still believed facts were worth attending to. Thanksgiving week. I drove to Western North Carolina the day before, but I didn't stay with my parents. I booked a room at a Comfort Inn in the next town over, anonymous and clean, a bed and a bathroom and no family within earshot. Another small, deliberate act. Another line I drew without explanation. I arrived at Harold's farmhouse at 7:30 in the morning, while mist was still sitting on the lake surface and the walnut trees were bare against a white sky. Harold was in the kitchen making his mother's sweet potato pudding from a recipe card in Ruth's handwriting, taped inside a cabinet door with a piece of Scotch tape that had yellowed to the color of old bone. I helped him set 22 places. Ruth's china, ivory with a thin cobalt border, each piece handled as carefully as the thing it remembered. Harold polished the serving spoons himself at the sink, working each one until it reflected the morning. Guests arrived beginning at 11. Agnes came first, with her walker and her opinions, driven by her grandson. Harold's old business partner Everett and his wife. Cousin Dara with a pecan pie and eyes that found mine the moment she came through the door. 2 of Harold's former foremen, men in their late 70s who still called him H and shook hands like they were testing material strength. And then, at 11:45, the other car. My parents pulled up in their Subaru. My mother carrying a covered dish. My father with his hands in his coat pockets. And behind them, Melissa and Brandon and Sophie. Melissa in a caramel-colored cashmere coat. Brandon in a canvas jacket that had probably cost what the Asheville room would have cost. Sophie running ahead of all of them toward the front door. Dinner filled Harold's house the way Ruth would have wanted it to. Turkey on the big platter. The sweet potato pudding in its cast-iron dish. 3 pies on the sideboard. Rolls in a basket. Harold stood at the head of the table and said grace, not long, not elaborate, just measured and true, the voice of a man who understood that a room full of people needed something to anchor to. 22 voices said amen, and the meal began. Melissa told stories from Asheville. The trail where Sophie collected 14 different leaves. The restaurant with the trout. The morning mist lying over the mountains like something deliberate. She told them well, she always does, leaning forward, hands moving, voice rising and falling, filling the room entirely so that there was no oxygen left for a different version of events. Then she raised her glass. I want to say something, she announced, and the table settled. To family. To the people who show up for each other no matter what. She looked at me when she said show up. Not long. A half second, maybe less. But I saw it. Agnes saw it. Dara saw it. Harold, at the head of the table, cutting his turkey with the steady patience of someone who had been feeding himself for 8 decades, looked up, watched, said nothing yet. I held my glass above the table for the length of the toast and set it down without drinking. The Tempranillo I'd brought sat untouched in front of me. The silence between me and that glass, in a room where everyone else was drinking, was its own kind of statement. After the main course, while the table broke into smaller conversations and Harold's old foreman argued about the Tennessee football season, Melissa began talking about a boat. Grandpa, Brandon's been looking at pontoons. Something the whole family could use out here on the lake. Brandon picked it up smoothly, and there's a truck I've had my eye on for a while. Low miles. Good price. They floated these things into the air of the room casually, like trial balloons, watching to see who reached for them. Harold chewed his stuffing and said nothing. I stood to clear plates. I was stacking them at the kitchen sink when Melissa followed me in. She pulled the door almost shut behind her, and her voice dropped to the register she uses when she wants confrontation without an audience. Are you going to be strange all evening? I rinsed a plate. I'm not being strange. Then stop acting wounded. You left. You made that choice yourself. I set the plate in the rack and turned to face her. Because you didn't book me a room. Her jaw tightened. You could have called the inn yourself. You always find a way to handle things. And there it was. The oldest program in the family's operating system, running exactly as designed. Evelyn handles things. Evelyn doesn't need help. Evelyn doesn't need a room or a chair or a name in the caption because Evelyn always figures it out. I picked up the dish towel, dried my hands, set it on the counter. I looked at my sister standing in our grandfather's kitchen in her expensive coat with her hand on her hip, her entire life sustained by a monthly transfer from the man in the next room who had started with a second-hand truck. I walked back to the table. Dessert. Harold's lemon chess pie, his recipe and no one else's, never shared in 40 years. Coffee in Ruth's cobalt-rimmed cups. The table had loosened the way it does after the weight of a meal, belts adjusted, voices quieter, conversations drifting and overlapping. Melissa was telling Dara and Everett's wife a story. Her voice carried the bright, performed confidence of someone who has had a very long time to shape a narrative and is now delivering the final version. And then Evelyn just left, she said, gesturing with her dessert fork. Right out of the lobby. We were all there having a wonderful time and she simply walked out. So dramatic. Didn't even say goodbye. She laughed. It was a small laugh, practiced, the sound of a punchline landing. The table turned toward me. Slowly, face by face, the way a room shifts when it senses that something real is about to happen. Agnes set her fork down. Dara stopped mid-bite. Everett's wife looked at her husband. The old foreman glanced at each other across the table. Harold, at the head, looked up. I had 33 years of being the quiet one pressing against the inside of my chest, and I looked at Harold, and he looked at me, and he gave me the smallest possible nod, barely a movement at all, a shift of the chin, the kind you'd miss if you hadn't been waiting for it. I wasn't looking for permission. I was checking whether he could hold what was coming. I set my coffee cup on its saucer. The sound it made was small, but the room received it the way a room receives a gavel. I stayed in my chair, hands flat on the table. I used the voice I use for presenting findings to senior partners, level, unhurried, precise enough that volume would have been redundant. Melissa, you're right. I left. 22 people went still. But you left out the part where you didn't book me a room. I paused. Let it sit in the air. You stood in that lobby in front of strangers and said, we reserved rooms for the real family. Melissa's face changed. Not into guilt, not yet into shame, but into the sudden rigid attention of someone who hears their own words returned to them from a direction they didn't account for. I turned to my father, 3 seats down, his napkin twisted in both hands. "Dad, you texted me the morning after I left. You told me I could share Melissa's room, and then you wrote, we shouldn't have to book extra space for someone who doesn't bring anyone." I let the sentence land where it needed to land. My father looked at his plate. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. Dara closed her eyes. Agnes stared at my father with the expression of someone witnessing an accounting they had long suspected was coming. "I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me," I said. "I'm telling you what happened, in front of people who should have heard it a long time ago." The silence lasted exactly long enough for everyone to understand that something irrevocable had occurred. Then Melissa's chair scraped back from the table. She stood. Her voice hit the ceiling. "You are unbelievable. You're going to sit at our grandfather's Thanksgiving table and make this your moment. I left because you didn't give me one worth staying for, and now you've come here to turn everyone against us. We've done nothing wrong. We went on a family trip. You walked out because things didn't go your way, and that is on you, not us." Brandon leaned forward from his chair. "She's always done this. Makes everything about herself." Agnes interrupted without raising her voice. "Brandon, Melissa, sit down." She said it with the authority of someone who has been correcting behavior since before either of them was born, and the authority landed cleanly. My mother tried from her end of the table. "This isn't the place for this." I looked at Melissa, still standing, color high in her face, hands gripping the back of her chair. "You said I wasn't real family in front of people who didn't know us. I'm saying what happened in front of people who do. You can decide which of those is harder to live with." She shook her head rapidly, the way you shake off something that landed before you were ready. "You've always been jealous. You've never been able to handle that I have a life you don't have." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The room had already rendered its judgment, not from anything I said, but from the picture in front of 22 people. My sister standing, voice cracking, face flushed. Me in my chair, hands on the table, speaking at a consistent register. The power had shifted so completely that even Brandon had gone quiet. Harold set down his coffee cup. "Enough. One word." The room shut down around it. Harold rose slowly, 81 years old, taking his time about it, hands braced on the table, the careful deliberate rising of a man who understood that standing up was itself a statement and didn't waste statements. The table waited. "I started working at 15, he said. "Grocery stockroom, then a lumber yard, then somebody else's delivery route until I could buy my own truck. Built a company from a second-hand vehicle and $800 I borrowed from Ruth's father, who told me I'd lose every cent of it. 9 locations. 40 years. I never asked anyone for anything I wasn't prepared to earn." He looked around the table, at Agnes, at his old foreman, at the cousins and their children, the plates and the coffee cups and the remnants of the meal. Then his eyes settled on Melissa, on my father, on my mother. "In 11 years, I've sent this family over $1 million. Rent, car payments, tuition Melissa didn't finish, credit card bills, a mortgage on a house that no one in that house could afford without me writing the check." He let it sit. "Not one person who received that money has built a single thing with it." The table did not breathe. He looked at me then, and his voice didn't soften. Harold's voice doesn't soften, but it settled, the way a compass needle settles when it finally stops being pulled in the wrong direction. "The only one who never once asked me for anything is the only one who turned out the way your grandmother would have recognized." He sat down, picked up his coffee, drank it. Melissa opened her mouth. Harold said, "Catherine, eat your pie." He used the name of a dress that meant the conversation was finished, and it was finished. She didn't eat her pie. Of course she didn't. Brandon gathered their coats. Melissa carried Sophie, who had been in the living room playing, mercifully removed from the table and unaware of what the adults had done to each other. They moved toward the door as a unit, fast, The exit of people who understand that the ground has shifted and want to be somewhere else before it shifts again. I was rinsing cups at the kitchen sink when Melissa appeared in the doorway. Sophie on her hip, Brandon behind her. Her voice came out low and shaking. Do you understand what you've just done? He's going to cut us off. You know that. You sat there with your quiet voice and your sad eyes and you let everyone pity you, and now he's going to stop, and that is your fault. I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I turned to face her. I didn't ask him to do anything. You didn't have to. You just had to perform. I told the truth, I said. In front of people who mattered. The same way you told yours in that lobby. She stared at me. Her mouth moved. No words came. I watched her search for a response and find the shelf bare. And then, for just a second, half a second, the length of a breath, the fury dropped away and I saw what was underneath it. A woman standing in a kitchen, in expensive clothes, holding her daughter, beginning to understand that the life she had been living was not a life she had built. That it had been assembled for her, piece by piece, by a man in the next room who had just told a table full of witnesses that he was done. She picked up her keys. She walked out without another word. Brandon followed. The door shut. Evening. The guests had gone home in ones and twos. Agnes kissed my forehead at the door. Dara held both my hands and didn't need to say anything. Harold's old foreman shook his hand, nodded at me without drama, the acknowledgement of people who file things quietly and remember them completely. Harold was inside finishing the dishes. He'd refused my help. You've done enough today, Evie. I sat on the porch in one of the 2 rocking chairs Harold had kept out there for as long as I could remember, and I listened to Lake James breathe in the dark, and I watched the stars come out over the water one at a time. The screen door opened. My father came out with his coat on and his car keys in his hand. My mother was already in the Subaru, a shadow behind glass. He stood at the porch railing with his back to me and spoke without turning around. I shouldn't have written that text. No, I said. You shouldn't have. I meant, he stopped. Searched. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You meant every word, Dad. You just didn't plan on anyone hearing them out loud. He scuffed the porch boards with his shoe. Back and forth. The way a child does when he's been told to apologize and hasn't worked out how to mean it yet. Are you going to be all right? I rocked the chair once, slowly, and looked at the lake. A single dock light on the far shore held steady against the dark, everything around it shifting. I've been all right for 33 years without a room or a chair or my name in the frame. I'll keep being all right. He stood there another moment, waiting for something. Absolution, maybe. Permission to feel that the drive home wasn't the worst thing he'd ever done. I didn't give it. He walked down the steps and across the gravel to the Subaru, and I heard the engine start, and the headlights swept across the walnut trees as he turned at the bottom of the drive, and the red taillights disappeared around the bend where the lane curved into dark. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, the money stopped. Harold made no announcement, sent no letter, held no meeting. December 1st came, and the transfer that had arrived every month for 11 years, $9,000, distributed between my parents' and my sister's household with the quiet reliability of a utility bill, simply wasn't there. January's didn't come either. No explanation. Just silence in accounts that had never known silence before. The aftermath moved the way water recedes after a flood, first slowly, revealing the highest ground, then all at once, exposing everything that the current had been covering. Melissa and Brandon shed their lifestyle in layers. The cashmere coat went to a resale shop in January. The credit card my grandfather had been paying, the one Melissa had carried since her junior year of college, the one that had never once been declined, was closed. Brandon started working Saturdays at the dealership. Early openings. Holiday weekends. The hours he had always left for someone who wanted it more. Melissa got a part-time job at a home goods store in the new year, her first employment in nearly 7 years. She called me in February. Not to apologize, not to fight, to ask how to write a resume. I sat at my kitchen table in Raleigh and walked her through it, section by section. Employment history. Skills. How to frame the years at home in language a hiring manager would recognize. I helped her because that is who I am. Because helping my sister format a resume didn't require me to pretend that a lobby in Asheville had never happened. My parents listed the house in March. For bedrooms, mortgage my grandfather had been subsidizing for a decade. They moved to a 2-bedroom apartment near the university. My father found a real job, facilities management at a community college, starting over at 61, doing the kind of work that actually required showing up and doing it. I would be lying if I said I felt nothing about that. What I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was the complicated kind of tenderness that comes from watching someone you love meet a truth they spent 30 years outrunning. My mother texted me in January. Short message, no preamble. I'm sorry about Asheville. I'm sorry about a lot of things. First time she had ever typed those words to me in 33 years of being her daughter. I waited 2 days. Then I replied, I know, Mom. The door stayed open. Not the way it used to be, not wide and unexamined, not the door you walk through without thinking. More like a window that you choose to keep cracked. Deliberately. With intention. Cousin Dara started a group chat with me and Agnes. We talked every week, about work, about nothing, about family memories that had aged into something that didn't hurt to hold. Harold visits became fixed points on my calendar. Every other Saturday, trout at his table, coffee in Ruth's cups, the lake changing colors through the seasons. In April, the cherry trees along the lake road came into bloom, pale pink against dark water, petals lifting off in the breeze and landing on the gravel. I pulled up to the farmhouse and Harold was already on the porch with 2 cups poured, steam rising in the morning air. His fishing rod was leaning against the railing like it was waiting its turn. I sat down in the second rocking chair. The one that had always been there. The one I now understood had always been mine, even in the years I hadn't known to come sit in it. We drank our coffee and watched the lake. You know what's true about building something yourself? Harold said, after a while. Tell me. Nobody can dismantle it. They didn't put it together, so they don't know where the seams are. I watched a petal from the cherry tree lift off the railing and drift out over the water. No, I said. They don't. The lake held still. The morning held still. And I sat in my chair, my own chair, the one that had been waiting, and drank my coffee, and let the spring light do what spring light does when you finally stop turning away from it. Sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do isn't walking out of the lobby. It's sitting down at the table, looking at the people who share your blood, and telling the truth out loud. Not in anger, not for revenge, but simply because it happened, and it was real, and you were there, and you are done pretending otherwise. A hotel reservation with 2 rooms and no space for a daughter. A text about what a person is worth without a partner beside them. A dining room table and an old man standing up and saying the quiet part of 33 years out loud. If Evelyn's story sounds like your story, if you have been the reliable one, the self-sufficient one, the one everyone assumes is fine, you already know what it costs to be fine for everyone except yourself. Set down your suitcase. You've been carrying it long enough. Share this with someone who needed to hear it. Leave a comment. And stay, because the next story is already waiting.